Tonight we are going to be with something you know well, maybe too well. The mind that will not stop. You are lying here. The pillow is right. The blanket is warm. The room is dark enough. Everything around you has settled down for the night. Everything except the one thing you need most to be still. It starts with something small. A sentence someone said this afternoon. A task you are not sure finished, and then the mind picks it up, turns it over and begins to build. One thought becomes two, two become 10. And before you know it, the mind has built an entire city from a single brick. Streets and alleys and rooms you did not ask for, all lit up, all busy, all yours. You have probably tried to stop it. Most of us have. We tell the mind to be quiet. We count sheep. We breathe in a pattern we read about somewhere. And sometimes it works. But tonight it did not. And so you are here. That is all right. You did not fail at sleeping. You are not broken. The mind is simply doing what minds do. The way rain falls, the way rivers run, the way the wind moves through a house that has left its windows open. It is not a flaw. It is just what is happening. So, tonight, we are not going to fight the mind. We are not going to wrestle it into silence. We are going to do something much softer than that. We are going to sit with it, the way you might sit with a friend who cannot stop talking because they are afraid of the quiet. You do not shout at them. You do not leave the room. You just stay. And after a while, they slow down on their own. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. What we will explore tonight comes from the Buddhist and Zen traditions. These are old, quiet teachings. They were not written in lecture halls or classrooms. They were passed along on forest paths, in small huts beside rivers, between people who also could not sleep, between people who also wondered why the mind refused to rest when the body was ready. You do not need to know anything about Buddhism or meditation. You do not need to believe anything. Tonight is stories told in the dark, the way they have always been told. And between the stories, a few gentle ideas, not instructions, not homework, just things to rest beside. So wherever you are right now, let yourself arrive here, not somewhere else, not tomorrow, here. Let the shoulders drop. You may not have noticed how high they were. Let them fall. Let the jaw soften. Let the space between your teeth open just a little. If your hands are holding your phone, perhaps set it down somewhere close. Let the hands open. Let them rest on the blanket or beside you, palms up or palms down, whichever feels like less effort. There is nothing to solve tonight. The thoughts that have been circling, they will still be there in the morning if they matter. And if they do not matter, they will have wandered off on their own, the way guests do when the hour gets late. Either way, they do not need you right now. You do not need to carry any of it. Tonight is just this, your breath, the dark, and some old quiet stories about minds that would not rest and the gentle things that help them find their way to stillness. Thank you for joining us here at Moonlit Dharma. Let us begin. Most of us know this feeling. You are lying in bed. The day is done. The lights are off. You have said goodnight to everyone who needed it. And then in the quiet, the mind begins. It does not ask for permission. It does not knock. It simply starts. A thing someone said. A look on someone's face that you are not sure how to read. A small mistake from the afternoon that meant nothing at the time, but now, in the dark, has grown 3 sizes. And the strange thing is this. The more you try to stop thinking, the more the thinking grows. You push one thought away and 2 more arrive. You try to clear the mind and the mind fills up again. Like a table you keep wiping that keeps gathering dust before your hand is even finished. This is not a sign that something is wrong with you. This is not a flaw or a failure. This is what minds do. Have you ever noticed how it works? It rarely starts with something large. It starts with something small. A word, a glance, a tiny unfinished thing. And the mind picks it up like a thread and begins to pull. And the thread leads to another thread. And that one leads to another. And before long you are holding a whole tangled knot of thinking that started with almost nothing. You might replay a conversation. Not the whole conversation, just one sentence. And then the mind begins to rewrite it. What you should have said. What they probably meant. What might happen tomorrow because of what was said today. The mind is very good at this. It can build a cathedral of worry from a single stone. There is an old word for this in the Buddhist tradition. The word is Papañca. It is sometimes translated as mental proliferation, but the meaning is simpler than it sounds. It means the way the mind takes one small thing and builds it into many things. The way a single worry becomes a web of worries. The way one sentence from the afternoon becomes an entire conversation that never happened, spoken in the voice of someone who is not even here. The monks who first named this were not reading about it in books. They were lying awake at night just like you. They were watching their own minds do this very thing. And instead of calling it a problem, they called it a pattern. The mind proliferates, that is what it does. The way fire burns, the way water runs downhill. Not because it is broken, because that is its nature. And here is the part that may matter most tonight. You do not have to fix it. You do not have to stop the mind from thinking the way you do not have to stop the wind from blowing. You just have to know what is happening. That is all. Just to see it and say, ah, there it is again. The mind is doing what minds do. There is a story about this that has been told for many generations. Long ago, in a country where the hills were green and the rivers were cold and clear, there lived a man who could not quiet his mind. He was not a monk. He was not a scholar. He was an ordinary man, a trader of cloth and thread who walked between villages with his goods on his back. He was good at his work. He knew the roads well. He knew which paths were muddy in spring and which dried first after rain. He knew the weight of silk and the worth of cotton. He knew which villages would buy and which would only look. But at night, when the walking was done and the bundles were set down, the mind would start. It would go over every deal he had made that day, every price he had quoted, every face that had turned away without buying. He would lie on the ground in whatever village had taken him in, staring at the ceiling of whatever small room he had been offered, and the mind would build. One worry would become two. Two would become five. By midnight, the mind had constructed an entire future of failure and ruin from a single unsold bolt of cloth. He tried everything. He tried counting his breaths. He tried reciting old poems his mother had taught him. He tried exhausting himself by walking further, carrying more. Nothing worked. The mind would wait. It was patient. It always had more to say. One evening, as the light was turning amber and the birds had begun to settle in the trees, he came to the foot of a hill he had never climbed. It was not a large hill, but at its top he could see a thin trail of smoke rising in the darkening sky. Someone lived up there. He had heard rumors in the last village. An old man on the hill, a hermit, someone who had once been restless and was now, by all accounts, very still. The woman who served him rice that evening had said it casually. The way you mention a landmark. There is an old man on the hill. He has been there longer than the trees. The path was narrow and steep. Loose stones shifted under his sandals and rolled behind him, clicking against each other as they fell. The air cooled as he climbed. He could smell pine resin and something else. Something green and sharp like crushed leaves underfoot. Small insects hummed in the grass beside the trail, their sound rising and falling like a single breath. Halfway up, he stopped and looked back. The village below was already small. Cooking fires sent thin columns of smoke into the evening air. He could hear, very faintly, someone calling a child inside. The sound carried up the hill and then was gone, swallowed by the wind. By the time he reached the top, his legs ached and the last of the daylight was draining from the sky. His hands were dusty. His feet were sore. The bundles on his back felt heavier than they had all day. There was a small hut. Not much more than 4 walls and a roof of dried grass that had gone dark and soft from many seasons of rain. A fire pit molded near the entrance, sending a thread of smoke into the evening air. Beside the hut, a stream ran over flat stones, making a sound like someone whispering in another room. The water caught the last of the amber light and held it, moving it downstream in small, bright flashes. An old man sat on a low rock near the stream. He was thin and very still. His robe was faded to the color of dust and his feet were bare against the cool stone. His hands rested on his knees. He did not look up when the traveler arrived. He seemed to be listening to something. Or perhaps he was simply sitting the way the rock was sitting, without effort, without intention, just there. The traveler stood there for a moment, breathing hard from the climb. Then he spoke. "I was told you might be able to help me," he said. "I cannot stop my mind from thinking." The old man said nothing. He did not move. The stream went on whispering. The traveler shifted his weight. "I have tried everything," he said, counting, breathing, walking until my legs give out. "But the mind keeps going. It will not stop." The old man looked at him then. His eyes were calm and very dark, like two stones at the bottom of a well. "Sit down," he said. The traveler sat on the grass near the rock. The ground was cool and slightly damp. He could feel the moisture through the fabric of his trousers. A cricket started up somewhere nearby, a single high note repeating and repeating. They sat in silence for a while. The stream moved over its stones. The fire pit crackled once and then was quiet. The sky turned from amber to the deep blue that comes just before the stars. "Do you hear the stream?" the old man asked. "Yes." "Can you stop it?" The traveler looked at the water. It moved steadily over the flat rocks, catching the last light, splitting around a larger stone, and coming together again on the other side. It had been running like this long before he arrived. It would go on running long after he left. "No," the traveler said, "I cannot stop a stream." "Why not?" The traveler was quiet for a moment. "Because that is what streams do," he said. "They run." The old man nodded. Just once, a small movement barely visible in the dimming light. "And your mind," he said, "what does it do?" The traveler opened his mouth to answer. Then he closed it. He sat with the question. The stream went on running beside them. The cricket went on singing its single note. The first star appeared above the ridge, faint and sharp. "It thinks," the traveler said finally. "That is what it does." "Yes," the old man said. They sat together in the quiet. The old man did not explain anything. He did not offer a method or a practice or a cure. He simply sat there, the way the rock sat there, the way the stream ran there, and let the evening come. The air had grown cool. The traveler could feel it against the skin of his arms, a faint chill that was not unpleasant, more like a soft hand. The stream caught the light of the first stars and held it in small moving flickers. An owl called somewhere in the trees below the ridge. Once, twice, then silence. The traveler noticed his breathing had changed. He had not tried to change it. It had simply slowed, the way a cart slows when the road levels out. His shoulders, which had been tight all day from the weight of his bundles, had dropped. He had not told them to drop. They just did. After a long time, the traveler spoke again. "But the stream," he said, "it keeps me awake. If I cannot stop it, how will I sleep?" The old man reached down and picked up a handful of small stones from beside the stream. He held them out in his open palm. In the fading light, they were smooth and dark, worn down by years of water. "Do you see these stones?" he asked. "Yes." "The water runs over them all day and all night. It never stops, and yet." He turned one of the stones in his fingers. "They are smooth. They are not fighting the water. They are not trying to stop it. They have simply let it run." He set the stones down carefully, one by one, on the flat rock beside him. Each one made a small sound, barely louder than the stream. "You do not need to stop the mind," he said. "You just need to stop standing in the middle of it." The traveler did not say anything. He sat on the damp grass and looked at the stream. The water moved. The stars came out one by one, like lamps being lit in a distant village. The old man's breathing had gone slow and even almost indistinguishable from the sound of the water. Something shifted in the traveler. Not a thought, not a realization he could put into words. It was more like a door that had been closed so long he had forgotten it was a door. And it did not swing open dramatically. It simply loosened on its hinges, just enough to let a thin line of cool air through. He did not try to stop the mind. The mind went on. It talked about the morning's trade. It wondered about the road ahead. It counted coins and weighed fabric, but for the traveler noticed that he was not inside those thoughts. He was here, on the grass by the stream. The thoughts were passing through him the way the water passed over the stones, and he was still. He slept that night beside the old man's hut. The ground was hard but not unkind. He pulled his cloak around himself and lay on his side facing the stream. The water ran all night. He could hear it even as sleep began to soften the edges of his thoughts. The mind talked all night, or at least for a while. It worried about the road, it counted coins. It replayed a conversation from 3 days ago that no longer mattered. He did not fight it. He did not try to solve anything. He just let it run. And somewhere between one thought and the next, the space between them grew a little wider, and wider still. Small at first, then longer. He rested, the way a bird rests between wing beats. Not by stopping, just by gliding. When he woke in the morning, the air was cool and damp. Mist hung low over the stream, moving slowly like cloth being pulled across water. The old man was already sitting by the stream in the same position as the night before, as though he had not moved at all. The fire pit had been relit. The smell of smoke and pine hung in the cool air, mixing with the faint sweetness of wet grass. Somewhere below the hill, a rooster crowed. The sound was thin and far away. The stream was louder now, or perhaps the world around it was quieter. The traveler packed his things and stood. His body felt lighter than it had in a long time. Not because anything had been removed, but because something had stopped clenching. "Thank you," he said. The old man nodded. "I did not teach you anything," he said. The traveler looked at the stream. It was still running. It had not stopped. It would never stop. But the sound of it, which had once felt like noise, now sounded like something else. Not silence, but close to it. Something that silence could rest inside of. He walked down the hill with his bundles on his back. The morning was still fresh. Dew sat on the grass beside the trail, catching the early light like tiny lamps. The stones under his sandals were cold and steady. Below him, the village was waking. He could hear a door open, a dog bark, the thin clang of a pot against a stove. The mind started up again before he reached the bottom. It talked about the day ahead. It worried about the weather. It planned and predicted and replayed. It counted the bolts of cloth and estimated how far he could walk before the afternoon heat. But something was different. He could hear the mind the way he heard the stream now. Not as something to fight, not as something to fix, just as something that was there, running, doing what it does. And between the thoughts, in the small spaces that had always been there, but that he had never noticed, there was something quiet, something still. Something that did not need the thinking to stop in order to be at rest. It had been there all along, under the noise, beside the worry, like the ground beneath a road that has carried every traveler and never once complained. Perhaps tonight you might notice something like this. Not the thinking. You already know the thinking well. It has been with you all day. It followed you to bed. It is probably here right now, murmuring about something, building its quiet city of worries and plans. But beneath it, or beside it, or around it, there is something else. Something that was here before the thinking started. Something that will be here after the thinking slows. You do not have to name it. You do not have to reach for it. It is not something you earn or achieve. It is not waiting at the end of a long effort. It is just what is already here when you stop trying to make the mind into something it is not. You might have felt it once or twice, in a moment between tasks, in the pause after a long exhale, in that strange quiet that comes when you step outside on a cold night and the air touches your face and for just a second, the mind forgets to speak. It was always there. It did not arrive. You simply noticed it. The mind is not broken. It is simply a room where every candle has been lit at once. And tonight you do not need to blow them out. You just need to notice that even with all those candles burning, the room itself is still. The walls do not move. The floor does not shake. The room holds it all. Every flickering thought, every small worry, every half-finished sentence. The room holds them all and does not break. And the room is you. You might let that settle for a moment. There is no rush. There is nowhere to be. There is nothing to figure out tonight. The mind does what minds do. And you are not the mind tonight. You are the room. You are the stillness that the thinking happens inside of. And that stillness does not need the thinking to stop. It is already here. It has always been here. Let us rest here for a moment. Take a breath. Feel where the body meets the bed. Notice how the breath has its own rhythm, its own pace. You did not have to set it. It found its way on its own. When you are ready, we will continue together. There is something the mind does at night that it does not do during the day. During the day, you are busy. You are moving, you are answering, deciding, and reaching for the next thing. The mind has a job to do and it does it. But at night, when the doing stops, the mind does not stop with it. It looks around for something to hold, and it finds things. Not always your things. Sometimes the mind picks up a worry that belongs to someone else. A friend's problem, a family member's sadness, a situation at work that is not yours to solve but that you have somehow taken on as if it were. You did not decide to carry it, you just noticed it sitting there, and your hands reached out, and now here you are at 2 in the morning holding something heavy that no one asked you to hold. We do this more than we realize. We carry other people's anger home with us. We carry a stranger's sharp words on the train. We carry the weight of news we read on a screen, stories about people we will never meet in places we will never go. And the mind holds all of it, every piece, as though each one is urgent, as though each one needs solving tonight. But here is something worth noticing. Not everything the mind is holding right now belongs to you. Some of it was never yours. Some thoughts are luggage someone left at your door. You carried them in without checking the name. In the Buddhist tradition, there is a word for this tendency. The word is upadana. It means clinging or grasping. But the image behind the word is even simpler than that. It is the image of a hand that closes around something and forgets to open. Not because the thing is valuable. Not because holding it serves any purpose. Simply because the hand closed. And closing is easier than opening. The monks who studied this pattern noticed something important. The suffering is not in the thing you are holding, the suffering is in the holding itself. The tightness of the grip. The refusal to set it down. Not because you are stubborn, but because somewhere without words the mind decided that letting go means not caring. That putting something down means it does not matter. But that is not what letting go means, not tonight. Tonight letting go simply means this, noticing what you are holding, and asking very gently, is this mine? There is a story about this. In a small village beside a lake where the water was so still in the mornings that the sky appeared twice, there once above and once below, she had been weaving since she was a girl, since her own grandmother had first placed her small hands on the shuttle and guided them across the frame. Her hands knew the loom the way a bird knows the air, without thinking, without effort, just movement and thread and the quiet rhythm of the shuttle passing back and forth. She was old now. Her hair had gone white and her fingers were thin, but they were still steady. She could feel a single thread out of place by touch alone, the way a musician hears a note that has gone slightly flat. She worked in a low wooden building at the edge of the village, near the water. The building had wide windows with no glass, just openings that let in the lake air and the sound of small waves against the shore. The air in the workshop always smelled of two things: cotton dust, which was fine and dry and settled on every surface like a second skin, and the lake itself, which smelled of clay and reeds and something faintly sweet, like rain that had fallen somewhere far away and drifted in on the wind. In the mornings, when the mist was still on the water, the workshop was cool and damp. By afternoon, the sunlight came through the windows in long warm columns and the dust floated in them like tiny stars. Her granddaughter came to live with her the year the girl turned 17. The girl was bright and restless. She had her mother's face and her father's stubbornness and a mind that would not leave things alone. She asked questions the way some people breathe, constantly, without pausing. She was good at the loom. Her hands learned quickly. Within a few months she could produce cloth that was tight and even, with clean edges and a steady pattern. The grandmother watched her at work and said little. She nodded when the cloth was good. She pointed when it was not. Mostly she sat at her own loom and wove, her shuttle moving in a rhythm so steady it sounded like a heartbeat. But the girl had a problem, not with the weaving, with everything else. She could not stop taking on the troubles of the people around her. When the fisherman down the lane argued with his wife, the girl lay awake thinking about it. When the rice merchant's son failed his examinations, the girl felt the weight of it in her own chest. When the old woman across the road lost her cat, the girl searched for 3 days, long after the old woman herself had stopped looking. It was not that she was weak. It was that she was open. She felt things the way the lake felt the wind. Every ripple from every direction reached her. At night, the girl would lie on her mat in the small room behind the workshop. The room was simple. A mat, a folded blanket, a wooden comb on a shelf. Through the thin wall, she could hear the lake lapping softly at the shore. It should have been a peaceful sound. But the mind would begin its inventory before the lapping could reach her. The fisherman's anger, the merchant's son's shame, the old woman's quiet grief. A sharp word between two neighbors that she had overheard near the well. The look on a child's face when his mother scolded him in the market. The girl held each one as though it were her own. She turned them over. She tried to find solutions. She lay in the dark and carried them all, every one through the long hours until her body ached and the thin light of dawn crept under the door. It had been like this for months. The girl was growing thin. Her eyes had the look of someone who is always listening for something. Even during the day, as she worked the loom, her hands would sometimes pause and her gaze would drift toward the window, toward the village, as though she could hear its sorrows from where she sat. One evening, the grandmother found the girl sitting on the wooden step outside the workshop staring at the lake. The sun had just set. The water was the color of ink. The air was cool and smelled of wood smoke from the village cooking fires. A heron stood at the far edge of the lake, perfectly still, its reflection a dark line in the water below it. "You are tired," the grandmother said. It was not a question. "I cannot sleep," the girl said. "My mind will not stop." The grandmother sat beside her on the step. The wood was smooth and worn from years of sitting. She said nothing for a while. They watched the heron. It did not move. The lake did not move. The smoke rose straight into the still air. "Come inside," the grandmother said. They went into the workshop. The looms stood in the lamplight like patient animals, their frames casting long shadows on the walls. The grandmother lit a small oil lamp. The light was warm and low, catching the threads that hung from the frame in thin golden lines. The air smelled of cotton dust and the faint oily sweetness of the lamp. Outside, the lake was invisible now, but they could still hear it, that soft, slow sound, like breathing. The grandmother sat at her loom. She moved slowly, the way she always moved. As though time were a thread she did not want to tangle. On the frame was a piece of cloth she had been working on for several days. It was a deep blue, the color of the lake at dusk, with a pattern of pale lines running through it like paths through a forest. "Sit here," she said, patting the low stool beside her. The girl sat. She could feel the warmth of the lamp on her face. She could see her grandmother's hands, brown and lined, resting on the edge of the loom. They were the steadiest hands she had ever known. "Look at this," the grandmother said. The girl looked. The cloth was beautiful. The pattern was even, and the color was deep. But near the lower left corner there were several threads that did not match. They were thicker than the others, darker, and they pulled at the fabric in a way that made the surface pucker slightly. It was a small thing. You might not notice it from across the room. But up close, under the lamplight, it was clear. Something was pulling the cloth out of true. "Do you see these threads?" the grandmother asked. "Yes," the girl said. "They do not belong." "No, they do not. I did not put them there on purpose. They found their way in. Perhaps from another bolt of thread. Perhaps from the basket where I keep the scraps. Perhaps they were already tangled with the good thread when I began. I did not notice them until I had already woven 3 rows past them." She touched the mismatched threads gently with her fingertip. The girl could see the way they distorted the pattern around them. Like a stone dropped into still water, the effect spread outward from the place where they sat. "If I leave them," the grandmother said, "they will pull at the cloth. Every new row I weave will bend toward them just slightly. The more I weave around them, the tighter they will grip. And eventually the whole fabric will begin to lean toward them, toward threads that were never part of the pattern." The girl was quiet. The lamp flickered. A moth had found its way in through the window and was circling the flame in slow, uncertain loops. Outside, the lake was just a wide, dark space where the village sounds went to disappear. "What do you do?" the girl asked. "That depends," the grandmother said. "When I was young, I used to get angry. I would pull at them, yank them out, and sometimes the cloth would tear. Other times I would leave them and pretend they were not there. I would weave over them and around them and tell myself it did not matter. But the cloth always knew. It always bent. She paused. She looked at the threads the way you might look at an old acquaintance. Not with anger, not with affection, just recognition. Now I do it differently, she said. The grandmother reached for a small pair of scissors that hung from a hook on the side of the loom. They were old, the metal dark with use, the handles worn smooth by decades of fingers. She held them near the mismatched threads but did not cut. I do not cut them with anger, she said. I do not tear them out. I simply loosen them. I make space around them, and then I lift them out gently, the way you would lift a sleeping child from a chair. She set the scissors down. She would not need them after all. Instead, she used her fingers. She worked the threads free one at a time. It took time. Her fingers moved slowly, carefully, easing each one from the weave without disturbing the threads around it. She did not rush. She did not pull. She simply created room around each dark thread until it was no longer held by the fabric, until it could be lifted away without resistance. The girl watched. The lamp burned low. The moth had settled on the edge of the table, its wings folded. The workshop was very quiet. The only sound was the faint whisper of thread against thread, so soft it was almost indistinguishable from silence. When the threads were free, the grandmother held them in her open palm. 4 short pieces of dark thread. They looked like nothing, ordinary, small. They had no weight. You could blow them off your hand. These are not bad threads, the grandmother said. They are just not mine. They belong to some other cloth, some other pattern, some other weaver's loom. And I cannot weave my cloth and theirs at the same time. No one can. She set the threads on the table beside the lamp. Then she turned back to the loom and ran her hand across the place where they had been. The fabric was smooth again. The pattern continued, unbroken, as though the dark threads had never been there at all. "Does the cloth miss them?" the girl asked quietly. The grandmother smiled. It was a small smile, tired but warm. "The cloth does not know they were there," she said. "It only knows that it can breathe again." The girl stood there for a long time after the grandmother had gone to bed. She looked at the 4 threads on the table. She looked at the cloth on the loom, glowing faintly in the last of the lamplight. She thought about the fisherman and his wife, the merchant's son, the old woman and her missing cat, the sharp words at the well, the child's face in the market. She thought about how she had woven each of their sorrows into her own nights, pulling them tight, wrapping her own thoughts around them until she could not tell where their pain ended and her wakefulness began. She had been weaving a cloth that was not hers, and the weight of it was bending her out of shape. She did not say anything. She did not need to. She just looked at the 4 dark threads on the table, small and harmless in the lamplight, and felt something in her chest loosen. Not all at once, not dramatically, just the smallest opening, like the first thread being eased free from a place it did not belong. That night she lay on her mat and the mind began its usual work. The fisherman, the merchant, the old woman, the words at the well. It all came, the way it always came, like guests arriving at a door that had never been locked. But this time she noticed something. She noticed the threads arriving. She felt them trying to weave themselves into her thoughts, trying to pull tight, trying to become part of her night. And for the first time she did not pull them tight. She simply noticed them. Oh, this one is not mine. This worry about the fisherman's marriage. That is his thread, his pattern, his cloth. This sadness about the merchant's son that belongs to his mother, his father, his own quiet heart. Not mine. This one is not mine either. And she let them sit beside her, loose and untangled the way the grandmother had set them on the table. Not thrown away, not denied, not pushed out with force, just not woven in. Through the wall she could hear the lake, that soft, slow sound. It had been there every night. She had just never heard it clearly before. There had always been too many other sounds in her head, too many threads pulling at the fabric of her attention. She slept before the moon reached the center of the sky, and the lake went on breathing beside her, the way it always had. You may recognize something of this tonight. The thoughts that are keeping you awake, not all of them are yours. Some of them belong to the day. Some belong to other people. Some are old threads from last week, last month, last year that somehow got tangled into tonight. You do not have to cut them away. You do not have to push them out. That would be just another kind of holding, another kind of tightness. You might simply notice them, the way the grandmother noticed the threads in her cloth, without anger, without urgency, just a quiet recognition. This one is not mine. This worry belongs to tomorrow. This sadness belongs to someone I love but cannot fix tonight. This plan, this rehearsal, this replaying, it belongs to the morning, not to this pillow, not to this dark room, not to this breath. You do not have to carry any of it tonight, not because it does not matter, but because your hands have been full for a very long time, and they are tired, and the things you are holding will still be there in the morning, when your hands are rested and your grip is steady. Tonight the hands can open. Tonight the threads can lie loose beside you on the table. Not gone, not lost, just not woven in. And in the space where the holding used to be, there is room. Room for the breath, room for the dark, room for the body to settle into the bed the way the lake settles when the wind has passed. Still, smooth, reflecting nothing but the sky. Let us pause here for a moment. There is no rush. Feel the weight of the body. Notice how it is being held by something. The bed, the blanket, the floor beneath the bed, the ground beneath the floor. You do not have to hold yourself tonight. You are already being held. And whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Have you ever noticed that the thinking itself is not the worst part? The worst part is what comes after. The judgment, the frustration, the voice that says, "Why are you still awake? What is wrong with you? Everyone else is sleeping. Why can you not just turn it off?" That voice, you know it well. It arrives a few minutes after the thinking starts. First the mind wanders. Then the mind notices it is wandering. And then, this is the part that hurts. It scolds, it criticizes. It says things you would never say to another person. You are too anxious. You are too sensitive. You should be stronger than this. You should be able to sleep like a normal person. And so the night becomes two problems instead of one. The first problem is the thinking. The second problem is the anger about the thinking. The first is a small wound. The second is the hand pressing into it again and again, making it deeper. This is one of the oldest observations in the Buddhist tradition. It comes from a teaching called the Sutta of the Second Arrow. The Buddha was speaking to a group of monks and he asked them a simple question. If a man is struck by an arrow, he said, he feels pain. That is the first arrow. But then, if the man is struck by a second arrow in the same place, the pain is far greater. Not just doubled, far greater. The first arrow, the Buddha said, is the painful experience itself. The thought that will not leave, the worry that keeps circling, the memory that surfaces in the dark. You did not choose it. It arrived the way weather arrives, without invitation. The second arrow is what you do with it. The anger at yourself for thinking. The shame of not sleeping. The harsh inner voice that says you are failing at the simplest human act. This second arrow, this is the one you fire at yourself. The well-taught person, the Buddha said, when touched by a painful feeling, does not add to it. They feel the first arrow. They do not reach for the second. This is not about pretending the first arrow does not hurt. It does. The thinking is real. The worry is real. The mind going around and around at 3 in the morning. That is real, and it is exhausting. But the second arrow, the judgment, the frustration, the war you wage against your own mind for doing what minds do, that one is optional. That one you are holding in your own hand, and tonight you might choose to set it down. There is a story about this. In a village beside a wide, slow river, in the season when the rains came every afternoon and the air was thick and warm and smelled of wet earth, there was a simple place, a long wooden building with a sloping roof and one wall open to the river. The floor was packed dirt, smooth from years of bare feet. Clay pots in various stages of completion lined the shelves along the back wall, some still soft and damp, others dry and pale, waiting for the kiln. The workshop belonged to an old potter. He had been making pots for so many years that his hands had taken on the color of the clay itself, a deep reddish brown that no amount of washing could remove. The shelves behind him held the work of decades, jars with wide bottles for oil, teacups so thin you could see the shadow of your fingers through them. Each one carried the quiet confidence of hands that had long ago stopped trying to prove anything. He worked slowly. He spoke little. When he did speak, his voice was low and unhurried like the river outside. He had a habit of humming while he worked, a tune so faint it might have been the wheel itself turning. He had taken on an apprentice the previous autumn, a young man, perhaps 20, with quick hands and a quicker temper. The young man had walked 3 days to reach the workshop. He had heard the old potter's name spoken with reverence in his own village, and he had come carrying nothing but a small bag of clothes and a hunger to learn that was almost physical. You could see it in the way he watched the old man's hands, the way he leaned forward when a new technique was shown, the way he stayed at the wheel long after the old potter had gone to bed, practicing by lamplight until his arms shook. He was talented. His pots were symmetrical and clean. His glazes were smooth. He could center a lump of clay on the wheel faster than anyone the old potter had seen. But the young man had a problem that had nothing to do with skill. He could not forgive himself for mistakes. When a pot cracked in the kiln, the young man would slam his hand against the table. When a glaze ran or bubbled, he would sit with his head in his hands for an hour, sometimes 2, going over what he had done wrong, tracing the failure back to its source, as though understanding it might undo it. When a piece wobbled on the wheel and collapsed into a lump, he would start the whole day over, as though the one failure had contaminated everything that came after it, even the pieces that had come before, even the ones that were good. The other apprentices in the village talked about it. They said the young man was too hard on himself. They said he would burn out before his first year was done. But the young man did not hear them or did not care. He was too busy fighting a war that no one else could see, a war against his own imperfection. The old potter watched this. He said nothing for many months. He let the young man work. He let him rage and sulk and punish himself. He waited the way the river waited, not with impatience but with a kind of steady, unhurried attention, the way you wait for fruit to ripen, not by pulling at it, just by being near. One afternoon the rains came early. The sky turned dark while the sun was still high, and the first drops hit the tin roof of the workshop like small stones. Within moments the drops became a downpour, steady and heavy, filling the air with a roar that made conversation impossible. The air changed. It went from warm and dry to cool and heavy in the space of a breath. The smell of wet earth came in through the open wall, mixing with the sharper smell of raw clay and the faint metallic tang of the kiln. Water began to drip from the edge of the roof in a silver curtain, and the river beyond it rose and darkened, carrying leaves and small branches from upstream. The young man was working on a large bowl. It was the biggest piece he had attempted. He had been shaping it for 2 days, building the walls slowly, letting each layer dry before adding the next. The clay was thin and even. The curve was beautiful. He was close to finishing. And then his hand slipped. It was a small thing, a moment of lost attention. His thumb pressed too hard on the inner wall and the clay buckled. A crack appeared near the rim, thin as a hair, and ran down the side of the bowl like a river finding its way through a valley. The young man stared at the crack. The rain hammered the roof. The river moved past the open wall, brown and swollen from the storm. He could feel the heat rising in his chest, the familiar heat, the anger that came not at the clay, not at the rain, not at anything outside him, but at himself. He stood up. He lifted the bowl from the wheel and held it at arm's length. For a moment it seemed he would throw it against the floor, the way he had thrown so many pieces before. His jaw was tight, his breathing was fast. The veins in his forearms stood out against the clay dust on his skin. And then he did throw it. The bowl hit the packed earth floor and shattered. Pieces of clay scattered across the workshop. One piece, sharp-edged, skidded across the floor and cut the young man's hand. A thin line of blood appeared across his palm. He looked at his hand. The blood welled up slowly, mixing with the clay dust to form a pale reddish paste. It stung, not badly, but it stung. The old potter had been sitting on a low stool near the kiln, watching the rain. He had not moved when the bowl shattered. He had not flinched. Now he stood, walked over to the young man and looked at his hand. "Does it hurt?" he asked. "It is nothing," the young man said. His voice was tight. "I did not ask if it is nothing, I asked if it hurts." The young man paused. He looked at the cut. "Yes," he said, "it hurts." The old potter nodded. He picked up a clean rag from the workbench and handed it to the young man. The young man wrapped his hand. The rag turned pink. "Now," the old potter said, "tell me what broke the bowl." "I did," the young man said. "My hand slipped. I was not paying attention." "All right, and what cut your hand?" The young man looked at the floor, at the scattered pieces. "The bowl," he said. "A piece of it." "No," the old potter said. He said it gently, without sharpness. The bowl was already on the floor. It was broken. It was not moving. Broken things do not jump up and cut people. He crouched down and picked up the piece that had caused the cut. It was small, no bigger than a leaf. He held it between his fingers. "This piece was sitting here," he said, "still, harmless. It was your hand that moved. You threw the bowl. The bowl broke. A piece flew. Your hand was in the way." He set the piece down on the workbench. "The bowl cracking, that was the first thing. The accident, the slip. You did not choose it, it happened. That is what clay does sometimes." He paused. The rain had softened. It fell now in a steady hiss against the roof, quieter than before. The river outside had gone silver in the strange stormlight. "But throwing the bowl," the old potter said, "that was the second thing. That was yours. The bowl did not ask to be thrown. The floor did not ask to receive it. And your hand did not need to be cut. That cut is not from the mistake. That cut is from what you did with the mistake." The young man stood very still. The rag around his hand was damp. He could feel his heartbeat in the cut, a small, steady throb. The workshop smelled of rain and clay and the faintest trace of smoke from the kiln. A gecko clung to the wall near the open side, motionless, watching the rain with small bright eyes. "Every potter breaks pots," the old man said. "I have broken more pots than you have made. That is the first arrow. It comes. You cannot stop it. But the second arrow, the anger, the punishment, the throwing, the story you tell yourself about what the breaking means, that one you choose." He walked back to his stool and sat down. He picked up the small pot he had been working on before the rain came and turned it in his hands, examining it the way you might examine a sleeping child's face, with attention, without judgment. "You are a good potter," he said without looking up. "Your hands are good, your eye is good, but you are using half your strength to fight yourself, and that is strength you need for the clay." The young man did not answer. He sat down on the floor among the broken pieces and unwrapped his hand. The cut had already stopped bleeding. It was small, a thin line already beginning to close. He looked at it for a long time. The rain went on falling. The river went on moving. The old potter went on turning his small pot, his hands steady, his breathing even. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing more to say. The broken bowl lay in pieces on the floor, and the cut was healing, and the rain was washing the dust from the air outside. The young man did not clean up the pieces right away. He sat with them. He let them be what they were, broken clay. Not a verdict, not a punishment, not evidence of failure, just broken clay on a dirt floor in the rain. When he finally stood, he moved slowly. He gathered the pieces into a basket, one by one the way you might gather fallen leaves. He wiped the floor with a damp cloth. The rain had softened to a whisper now, barely audible above the sound of the river. He went to the clay bin and pulled out a fresh lump. It was cool in his hands, heavy and smooth and smelling of the earth it had come from. He sat at the wheel. He did not start a new bowl. He made something small, a simple cup. The kind of thing you make when you are not trying to prove anything, when you are just letting your hands move and the clay respond. The cup was not perfect. One side was slightly thicker than the other. The rim had a small wave in it that a more careful hand might have smoothed. But the young man did not throw it. He did not slam the table. He did not sit with his head in his hands. He looked at the wave in the rim and he let it be there. He set the cup on the shelf beside the old potter's work, where it sat, imperfect and whole, catching the last grey light of the rainy afternoon. And that was new, that was different, that was the space between the first arrow and the place where the second arrow used to fly. A small space, quiet, unremarkable, but real. Perhaps you know this space. Perhaps you have been here before. Lying in the dark, the mind going around, and then the second voice arriving, the harsh one, the one that says you should be asleep by now, the one that keeps a running count of how many hours are left before morning, the one that compares you to some imagined version of yourself, who sleeps easily, who does not worry, who sets things down without effort. That version does not exist. Everyone who has ever lived has lain awake at night at some point and wondered what was wrong with them. You are not alone in this room. You are in the company of every person who has ever watched the ceiling in the dark. That voice, the harsh one, is the second arrow, and tonight you might notice it differently. Not as the truth, not as a voice you must obey or argue with, just as a sound, a habit, an old pattern, firing the way it has always fired, not because it is right, but because it is familiar. The way a door creaks, not because it has something to say, but because the hinge is old. The bruise is small. The thinking, the worrying, the mind that will not rest, that is the bruise. It is tender, it is real, but it is small. The fist you keep pressing into it, the anger at yourself, the frustration, the judgment, that is the second wound. And that one you are making, right now, with your own hand. What if tonight you let the fist open, not to fix the bruise, not to make it disappear, just to stop pressing, just to let the tender place be tender without adding pressure to it? You do not have to earn this rest. You do not have to sleep perfectly to deserve sleep. You do not have to quiet the mind in order to be someone who deserves a quiet mind. The thinking is here. That is the first arrow. It arrived without your permission. That is all right. And the second arrow, the one aimed at yourself, perhaps tonight that one can stay in the quiver. Perhaps tonight the hand can rest, the bow can rest. You can set it down the way the young man set the cup on the shelf. Not perfect, not fixed, just there, whole enough, good enough, allowed to exist without judgment. And the only thing left is the small, ordinary tenderness of a mind that is doing its best in the dark. Not as a punishment, not as a sign that something is wrong. In the night, doing what minds do. Let us be still here for a moment. Let the breath come and go without trying to shape it. You might notice the places where the body has been holding on. The shoulders, the space behind the eyes, the jaw. These are the places where the second arrow lands most often. And tonight, they can soften, not because you are forcing them to, but because there is no arrow coming. Not right now, not tonight. When you are ready, we will continue together. If you are still here, that is good. You do not have to be awake for this. If the eyes are heavy, let them close. If the mind is still moving, that is fine too. It can listen while it moves. The way you can hear rain while you are doing something else. You do not have to stop what you are doing to hear the rain. It just reaches you. There is something about the thoughts that come at night that makes them feel permanent. During the day, a thought arrives and leaves and you barely notice. But at night, in the dark, in the stillness, each thought feels like it has come to stay. It sits down, it unpacks, it makes itself at home, and you begin to believe it lives here now. That this worry, this regret, this loop of planning, it is not visiting, it has moved in. But here is something the night makes us forget. No thought has ever stayed, not one. Not the happiest thought you have ever had, not the saddest, not the most persistent worry that circled your mind for weeks. They all left, every single one, quickly. Some took their time, but none of them stayed forever. This is what the Buddhist tradition calls anicca. It is usually translated as impermanence, but the word carries something gentler than it sounds. It does not mean that things are taken. It means that things move. Everything moves. The clouds move. The seasons move. The light changes on the wall throughout the day, and you do not try to hold it still. You let it move because that is what light does. Thoughts are the same. They arrive. They stay for a while. They leave, not because you push them out. Not because you won a battle against them, but because that is what thoughts do. They pass through. The way weather passes through a valley, the way sound passes through a room and then is gone, leaving the room exactly as it was. Tonight, if a thought is sitting with you that feels like it will never leave, you might hold this gently. It will leave. It always has. It always does. You do not have to make it leave. You just have to let it be here until it is ready to go. There is a story about this. In the mountains, on a road that wound between two valleys, there was a small guest house. It had been there for longer than anyone in the nearest village could remember. The walls were thick and cool in summer, and in winter they held the warmth of the fire the way a cupped hand holds water. The roof was wooden, dark with age, and when the rain came it made a sound against the wood that was neither loud nor soft, but somewhere in between. A patient sound, a sound that had been repeating for many years. The guest house was run by a man who had inherited it from his father, before that. He was not old and he was not young. He was the kind of age where the body has settled into itself and the face has found its final shape. His hands were rough from work. His voice was quiet. He did not talk much, but when he did, people listened because he only said things he meant. The road that passed the guest house was a trade road. Merchants and pilgrims and wanderers used it to cross from one valley to the other. In the warm months, the guest house was busy. Travelers arrived in the late afternoon, dusty and tired, and the innkeeper gave them a room and a meal and a place to wash. In the morning they left. That was the rhythm. Arrival and departure. Coming and going. The guest house stayed. The travelers moved through. But in winter the road grew quiet. The snow came early in the mountains and stayed late. The passes closed. Weeks could go by without a single traveler. The innkeeper would sit by the fire in the main room, mending a chair or sharpening a knife, and the guest house would be so still that he could hear the snow settling on the roof. Faint sound, like someone placing a cloth over a sleeping child. It was during one of these winters that something changed. The snow had been falling for 3 days, not heavily but steadily, the way it does when the sky has made up its mind, and there is no arguing with it. The road was buried. The fence post along the path had become soft white shapes like monks in white robes standing in a row. The trees along the ridge were white and motionless, like figures in a painting that no one had come to see. The innkeeper had not seen another person in a... He did not mind the solitude. He had grown up in this house. He knew its sounds the way you know the sounds of your own body. The creak of the third step on the staircase, the way the front door stuck in cold weather and opened smoothly in warm, the particular whistle the wind made when it found the gap between the shutters in the east room. These sounds were company enough. In the evenings he sat by the fire and mended things. A chair leg that had come loose, a blanket with a tear along the edge, the leather strap of a lantern. He worked slowly the way his father had worked, not because the work was difficult, but because there was no reason to rush. The fire burned, the snow fell, the house held. On the evening of the 12th day, there was a knock at the door. It was a hesitant knock, the kind made by hands that are cold and tired and not entirely sure they have arrived at the right place. The innkeeper set down the strap he was mending and went to the door. The iron latch was cold under his fingers. A traveler stood in the snow. He was thin and shivering, his cloak wet through, his face red from the cold. Snow clung to his eyebrows and to the bag on his back. His lips were pale. His breath came in small white clouds that the wind carried away before they could settle. "Please," the traveler said, "I need a room for the night." The innkeeper let him in. He took the wet cloak and hung it near the fire where it began to steam, sending the smell of damp wool into the warm air. He gave the traveler a blanket, rough and thick, and a seat by the fire. The chair was old, its wood darkened by years of firelight. It creaked when the traveler sat down, a small familiar sound like the house saying yes. He heated water for tea. The kettle sang on the iron grate, a thin high sound that filled the quiet room and seemed to push the silence back into the corners where it waited patiently. The traveler wrapped his hands around the cup and held it close to his face. The steam rose between them, carrying the faint bitter smell of dried leaves and something else, something warm and dark like the earth under snow. "I did not expect the pass to be closed," the traveler said. His voice was hoarse. "I thought I could make it through before the snow." "The snow does not check our plans," the innkeeper said. The traveler smiled at that, a tired smile, the kind that arrives without permission and leaves just as quickly. He drank his tea. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind pushed against the stone walls and moved on, finding nothing to grip. The house did not shudder. It simply stood, the way it had always stood, letting the wind do what wind does. The innkeeper showed him to a small room at the back of the house. bed was simple, a wooden frame with a straw mattress and 2 heavy blankets. The room smelled of cedar and cold stone. A single candle sat on a shelf beside the bed. The innkeeper lit it. "Sleep well," he said. "I will try," the traveler said, "but I should warn you I may not be good company tonight. My mind has been loud for days." The innkeeper paused at the door. "Loud how?" "It will not stop. It goes over things, plans, worries, conversations I had weeks ago that do not matter anymore, but the mind keeps replaying them. I have not slept well in a long time." The innkeeper nodded. He did not say anything right away. He leaned against the doorframe and looked at the candle. The flame moved slightly in the draught from the hall, leaning one way and then the other, but it did not go out. "Do you know what this place is?" the innkeeper asked. "A guest house," the traveler said. "Yes, and do you know what happens in a guest house?" The traveler looked at him. "People stay for the night." "People come," the innkeeper said, "and people go. That is what a guest house is for. It is not a home. No one lives here. They arrive, they rest, they leave. Some stay 1 night, some stay 3. Once a merchant stayed for 2 weeks because the river flooded and the bridge washed out. But eventually he left too. Everyone leaves." He paused. The wind pressed against the shutters. The candle steadied. "I used to worry about the guests," the innkeeper said. "When I was younger, when my father first left me this place, a difficult guest would arrive, angry or drunk or full of complaints, and I would lie awake thinking about them, wondering how to fix them, wondering what I had done wrong, wondering if they would ever leave." He smiled slightly. "They always left. Every single one. The angry ones left. The sad ones left. The ones who wept in their rooms left. I did not have to do anything. I did not have to fix them or calm them or send them away. I just had to let them be here, and in the morning or the morning after that, they were gone." The traveler was quiet. He could hear the fire in the main room, a low murmur through the stone walls. He could hear the snow outside, or rather, he could hear the particular silence that snow makes when it is falling on a world that has already gone still. "Your thoughts," the innkeeper said, "they are guests." He said it simply, the way you might say the fire needs another log, a fact, not a lecture, not a metaphor he was proud of, just something he had noticed over many years of opening the door and closing it again. They knock, you let them in, they sit by your fire for a while, they are loud or quiet, they stay for an hour or a night, and then they leave, because that is what guests do. No guest has ever stayed forever, not in this house, not in yours. He stepped back from the door frame. "You do not have to push them out," he said. "A good innkeeper does not throw guests into the snow. He lets them stay as long as they need. He does not argue with them. He does not ask them why they came. He just keeps the fire going and the door unlocked. And he trusts that the road will call them back eventually. It always does." He turned to go, then he stopped. "The mistake," he said, "is thinking the guests are you. They are not you. You are the house. The guests come and go. The house stays." He walked down the hall. His footsteps were soft on the stone floor. The traveler heard the main room door open and close, then quiet, then the fire, then nothing but the snow and the faint sound of the candle flame. The traveler lay down. The mattress was firm beneath him. The blankets were heavy and smelled of wool and wood smoke. He could feel the weight of them pressing him gently into the bed, the way a hand rests on a shoulder, not pushing, just present. He lay still for a moment, listening. The house had its own sounds at night. The fire in the main room, muffled by the stone walls, was a low, steady murmur. The wooden beams above him made a faint ticking sound as they contracted in the cold. Outside, the snow went on falling. He could not hear it land, but he could hear the silence it made, the particular dense quiet of a world being covered, layer by layer, in something soft. The mind started. Of course it did. The plans arrived first, bustling and busy like merchants unloading their carts in the courtyard. Then the worries, quieter but more persistent, the way cold air settles into the low places in a room. Then, the old conversations, faded and worn, like travelers who had been on the road too long and could not remember where they were going. But something was different tonight. The traveler did not try to push them out. He did not argue with them. He did not ask them to be quiet. He did not lie there clenching his jaw, wishing they would leave. He just noticed them arriving, the way the innkeeper must notice a knock at the door, without surprise, without resentment, just recognition. Ah, there is the worry about the road. There is the conversation from last week. There is the plan that I have gone over 14 times already. There is the old regret, the one that always comes when the house is quiet and the hour is late. Come in, he thought. Sit by the fire, stay as long as you need. And a strange thing happened. The thoughts, which had always seemed so urgent, so demanding, so permanent, they began to settle. Not because he forced them to, but because he had stopped fighting them. He had stopped standing at the door trying to decide which ones to let in and which ones to keep out. He had just opened the door, all the way, and the thoughts came in and sat down, and after a while, one by one, they began to grow quiet. Not all of them. Some kept talking. The worry about the road muttered in a corner for a long time. But even that one eventually ran out of things to say. And in the silence that followed, the traveler noticed something he had not noticed before. The house was still. It had always been still. Beneath the coming and going of every guest, beneath every knock and every footstep and every late-night conversation, the house itself had never moved. The walls held, the roof held, the fire burned, and the house was at peace, not because the guests had left, but because the house had never been the guests. He did not remember falling asleep. He only remembered the weight of the blankets, the smell of cedar, the sound of snow falling on a roof that had held for 100 years, and somewhere very far away the last guest walking down the road in the dark, leaving no footprints in the snow. A thought is just a traveler who mistook your house for its destination. It came in from the cold. It sat by your fire, told you its story, the same story it has told in every house it has visited, and not have to show it the door. You do not have to escort it out. You just have to trust that the road is still there, and the road is always there. It has never closed, not once, not even in the heaviest snow. Tonight you might notice the thoughts arriving, the worries, the plans, the old conversations that play themselves like songs you did not choose. They knock, they always knock, and tonight you do not have to decide whether to let them in or keep them out. That decision itself is exhausting. That standing at the door, sorting, judging, pushing, that is what keeps you awake, not the guests, the guarding. So tonight you can simply be the house, the warm, quiet house with the fire still burning, and the door unlocked and the road outside waiting patiently to carry them wherever they are going next. You do not need to manage them. You do not need to follow them to their rooms. You just need to let them be here and trust that they will go, because they always go. You are not the guests. You have never been the guests. You are the place they pass through, and passing through is what they do. Let us rest here for a while. There is no hurry tonight. Feel the breath moving in and out, the way air moves through a house with open windows. You do not have to guide it. It knows the way. Feel the heaviness of the body. This is not a heaviness that needs lifting. This is the kind of heaviness that comes when something has finally been set down, when the hands have opened, when the door has stopped being guarded. Let it be heavy. Let it rest. And whenever you are ready, we will go on together. There is no rush. There is only a little more, and it is gentle. You may have tried at some point tonight to make the mind be still. Most of us have. We close the eyes. We breathe slowly. We say to the mind, please just stop, just for a moment, just long enough to fall asleep. And the mind does not stop. If anything, it gets louder. The more you push against it, the more it pushes back. The harder you try to be still, the more restless you become. It is as though the effort itself is the problem, as though trying to force silence is just another kind of noise. This is something the Buddhist teachers noticed a very long time ago. They had a word for the natural settling of the mind. The word is citta passaddhi. It means tranquility, but not the kind of tranquility you create, the kind that arrives on its own when you stop trying to create it. Think of it this way. You cannot make yourself fall asleep. You know this. Everyone who has ever lain awake at night knows this. Sleep is not something you do. It is something that happens when you stop doing, when the body lets go, when the mind stops reaching, when the effort drops away and there is nothing left but the dark and the breath and the weight of the body on the bed. Stillness works the same way. It is not something you build. It is what remains when you stop building. It was there before you started trying. It is there now underneath the trying. You do not have to find it. You just have to stop looking for it long enough to notice it was never lost. There is a story about this. In a forest of bamboo, in a place where the trees grew so tall and so close together that the sunlight only reached the ground in thin, bright lines, there was a lake. It was not a large lake. You could walk around it in the time it takes to drink a cup of tea, but it was deep, deeper than it looked. The water was dark and cool, and in the early mornings before anyone came, the surface was so still that it held the reflection of every bamboo stalk around it, every branch, every leaf, as though there were two forests, one above and one below, meeting at a line so fine you could not tell where the real ended and the reflection began. Near the lake, in a small hut made of bamboo and dried leaves, lived an old nun. She had been there for many years. No one in the nearest village knew exactly how many. She was simply part of the forest the way the lake was part of the forest. She had always been there. She would always be there. Her robe was the color of earth. Her feet were bare and hardened from years of walking on the forest floor. She ate simply. Rice and whatever vegetables grew in the small garden behind her hut. Wild greens, mushrooms that appeared on fallen logs after the rain. She did not teach. She did not give lectures or hold ceremonies. She simply lived beside the lake. Occasionally someone would come to see her, walking the narrow path through the bamboo, and she would offer them tea and sit with them and sometimes say a few words. But mostly she was quiet. Quiet the way the lake was quiet, not because she had nothing to say, but because she had found that most things did not need saying. One morning before the sun had fully risen, a young woman came down the path. She was walking quickly, the way people walk when they are chasing something or running from something. Her breathing was fast. Her hands were clenched at her sides. Her face had the tight, drawn look of someone who has not slept well in a long time. She stopped at the edge of the clearing and looked around. The hut, the lake, the bamboo, tall and still, rising around her like the walls of a cathedral with no roof. A bird was singing somewhere high in the canopy, a single clear note repeated again and again, like a question that did not need an answer. The old nun was sitting on a flat stone near the water. She was not doing anything, just sitting. Her hands were in her lap, her eyes were open. She seemed to be watching the lake, or perhaps she was watching nothing at all. The young woman approached. Her footsteps were loud on the forest floor. Dry leaves crackled under her feet. Small twigs snapped. She sounded like a storm moving through a quiet room. "I was told you could help me," she said. Her voice was tight, stretched thin, like a thread pulled too far. The old nun looked at her. She did not smile. She did not frown. Her face was still, the way water is still. "Sit down," she said. The young woman sat on the ground near the stone. The earth was cool and slightly damp. She could smell it. Dark and rich, the smell of things growing and things decaying, both at the same time. The bamboo creaked softly above them, a low, slow sound like the forest breathing. "My mind will not stop," the young woman said. "Breathing, counting. I have sat in meditation until my legs went numb. I have walked for hours. I have tried to think about nothing. Nothing works. The harder I try, the worse it gets. It is like," she paused, searching for the word, "it is like trying to hold water in a fist. The tighter I squeeze, the more it runs through my fingers." The old nun nodded slowly. She turned and looked at the lake. This morning the surface was not still. Something had disturbed it. Perhaps a fish rising. Perhaps a leaf falling. Perhaps just the faintest breath of wind. The water was cloudy, stirred up from below, and the reflections that were usually so perfect were broken and blurred, scattered across the surface like pieces of a dream that would not hold together. "Look at the lake," the old nun said. The young woman looked. "It is muddy," she said. "The water is not clear." "No, it is not. Can you make it clear?" The young woman looked at the water. The impulse was immediate. She wanted to do something. Scoop the mud out, pour clean water in, stir it, filter it, fix it. Her hands, which had been clenched since she arrived, tightened in her lap. "I do not know," she said. "I could try to—" "No," the old nun said. The word was gentle but firm, like a hand placed on a door that was about to be opened. Do not try anything, just sit here, watch the water and wait. Wait for what? For nothing, the old nun said. That is the point, wait for nothing. They sat together. The young woman wanted to talk. She wanted to ask more questions. She wanted to understand. She wanted a technique, a method, a tool. Something she could use, something she could do. The not doing felt like a kind of pain. The sitting felt unbearable at first. Her legs itched. Her back ached. A mosquito landed on her arm and she brushed it away. And the small movement felt enormous in the stillness. Her mind screamed at her that this was a waste of time, that she should be doing something, that the water would never clear on its own, that nothing good comes from waiting, that she was foolish for coming here, that the old nun was foolish for telling her to sit. She shifted her weight. The dry leaves beneath her crackled. The old nun did not move. She sat the way the stone sat, the way the bamboo stood, as though sitting were not something she was doing, but something she was. 5 minutes passed. The young woman's jaw ached. She realized she had been clenching it. She let it soften. Her shoulders dropped just a little. 10 minutes. The bird was still singing its single note. The bamboo still creaked. A dragonfly appeared over the lake, hovering, its wings catching the early light in brief iridescent flashes. Then moved on, tracing a path across the water so precise it might have been following a line only it could see. 15 minutes, or 20. She had stopped counting. Time moved differently here in the bamboo forest, beside the water. It moved the way honey moves when you pour it without hurry. She noticed that her breathing had changed. It was deeper, slower. She had not asked it to change. It had simply responded to the sitting, the way a candle flame responds to a room that has gone still. It stopped flickering, it straightened, it burned clear. And something began to happen. The water began to clear. Not all at once, not dramatically. Not the way things change in stories where suddenly this was slower than that. Quieter. The mud did not vanish. It simply settled. Particle by particle, grain by grain, the cloudy water began to separate. The heavier particles sank to the bottom, finding their way down through the water the way sleep finds its way through a tired body. Slowly, inevitably, without being asked. The lighter particles drifted to the edges, and in the center of the lake, where the water was deepest and most still, a circle of clarity appeared. Small at first, no larger than a hand, then wider, like an eye opening after a long sleep, like a window being cleaned from the inside by someone who was in no hurry at all. The young woman watched this happen. She had not touched the water. She had not added anything or removed anything. She had not done anything at all. She had simply sat there, and the water had done the rest. The reflections came back slowly. First just shapes, then colors. Then the bamboo appeared in the water again, stalk by stalk, as though the lake were remembering what it looked like. The bird's song, which had been there the whole time, seemed louder now. Or perhaps the young woman was simply hearing it more clearly, the way you hear things when you stop talking. How, she said. She said it softly, as though speaking too loudly might stir the water again. The old nun did not answer right away. She sat with the question the way she sat with everything. Without hurry. The sunlight had shifted. It came through the bamboo now in long warm lines that reached the surface of the lake and rested there, golden and still. The water was never broken, the old nun said. It was stirred, that is all. Something moved through it and the mud rose up. Perhaps the wind, perhaps a fish, perhaps the rain. But the mud was always going to settle. It did not need your help. It did not need to be fixed or filtered or forced. It just needed you to stop stirring. She was quiet for a moment. A leaf fell from one of the bamboo stalks and landed on the surface of the lake. It sat there still, making no disturbance at all, just resting on the water the way the morning light rested on the water, without weight, without demand. Most people who come to me, the old nun said, have been stirring for a very long time. They have been reaching into the water with both hands, trying to scoop the mud out, trying to push the water into clarity, and every time they reach in, the water clouds again. And they think the water is the problem. They think the lake is broken. But the lake was never broken. The reaching was the problem. The fixing was the disturbance. She picked up a small stick from the ground and dipped it into the water near the shore. She moved it back and forth just once gently. The mud rose up again. The clarity vanished. The reflections blurred. It happened so quickly. One small motion and the whole surface changed. "You see," she said, "every time you reach into the water to fix it, you stir it again. Every time you try to force the mind to be still, you are the hand in the water. You are the stick. The trying is the stirring." She set the stick down on the stone beside her. They watched the water together, and again slowly, patiently, as though it had all the time in the world and no interest in proving anything, the water began to clear. The same process, the same settling, the same unhurried return to what it had always been. "Your mind is like this lake," the old nun said. Her voice was low now, almost a whisper, the kind of voice the bamboo might have if bamboo could speak. "It is not broken, it is stirred. The thoughts are not the problem. The mud is not the problem. The problem is the hand that keeps reaching in to fix what was already fixing itself." The young woman sat with this for a long time. The forest was quiet around them. The bamboo creaked. A small insect landed on the surface of the lake and sat there, weightless, making the tiniest dimple in the water. Even that small disturbance settled quickly. The water held the insect the way it held everything, without grasping, without resistance, just holding. She noticed that her hands had opened. She did not remember opening them. They had been clenched since she arrived, perhaps longer, perhaps for days or weeks, and now they were open, resting on her knees, palms up, as though they had set something down that she could not name. She did not feel fixed. She did not feel enlightened. She felt something much smaller and much more real than that. She felt tired, genuinely tired. The kind of tired that comes when the body finally believes it is allowed to rest, when the fighting stops and what remains is not victory, but something quieter. Something like the lake after the mud has settled. Not empty, not perfect, just clear enough to see the bottom. She walked back through the bamboo forest as the sun rose higher. The light came through the canopy in long golden shafts that reached the forest floor and rested there in warm, still pools. The air smelled of damp earth and green leaves and the faint sweetness of bamboo sap. Somewhere a stream was running, hidden by the undergrowth. Its sound so gentle it might have been the forest humming to itself. Her footsteps were softer now. She did not know if the ground had changed or if she had. She walked slowly, there was no rush. The path through the bamboo was narrow and winding, and she let it take her where it was going. She did not try to walk faster. She did not think about what she would do when she arrived. She just walked, and the walking was enough. The mind was still there. It talked, it planned, it worried the way it always worried, the way it had worried for months. But she noticed that she was no longer reaching into it to fix it. She was no longer stirring, she was just walking, and the thoughts were just there, settling on their own the way the mud had settled, the way the light settled on the surface of the water, the way the morning settled into itself without anyone asking it to. Perhaps you might notice this tonight. The mind is stirred, that is all. It is not broken, it is not failing. It has simply been touched by the day, by the hours, by the small and large things that move through you since morning, and the mud has risen, and the water is cloudy. But you do not have to clear it. You do not have to reach in. You do not have to try. The trying is the stirring. The fixing is the disturbance. The effort to be still is the very thing that keeps the stillness away. Stillness is not something you build. It is what remains when you stop building. It is already here, under the thoughts, under the worry, under the planning and the replaying and the counting of hours. It is the bottom of the lake. It never moved, it never left. It was just hidden for a while, the way the sky is hidden by clouds. The clouds pass, they always pass, and the sky is still there. It was always there. Tonight you do not have to do anything with the mind. You do not have to calm it or quiet it or fix it. You can just let it settle the way water settles, the way dust settles in a room after the door has been closed, the way the breath settles when you stop counting it. Let us be still here for a while. Not the still of trying, the stillness of feel the body against the bed. Feel how the breath has found its own rhythm, slow and even without your help. You did not have to teach it. It already knew, the way the water already knew how to clear, the way the lake already knew how to hold the sky. When you are ready, we will go on together. There is no rush. The water is settling. Let it set. There is a difference between trying to stop the wind and learning to shelter the flame. It is a small difference, but tonight it might be the only one that matters. Most of us, when the mind is loud and the night is long, try to stop the thinking. We push against it. We hold our breath and squeeze our eyes shut and will the mind into silence. And sometimes it works for a moment, the way holding your breath works for a moment. But then you have to breathe again and the thinking comes back, and it comes back louder because now it has something new to talk about. It talks about the failure. It talks about how you could not even be still for 30 seconds. But what if stopping the wind was never the task? What if the task was always smaller than that? Gentler, closer to the body, closer to the breath. In the Buddhist tradition, there is a practice called sati. It is usually translated as mindfulness, but the original meaning is closer to something simple. It means remembering the past, remembering where you are, remembering that you are here, in this body, in this breath, in this moment, not somewhere else, not yesterday, not tomorrow, here. Sati is not a way of stopping the wind. It is a way of sheltering the flame. The wind blows, the thoughts come, the mind does what it does, but in the middle of all that movement there is a small still place, and sati is simply the act of returning to it, again and again. Not with effort, not with force, just the way your hand finds your face in the dark. You do not have to think about it. You just remember where it is. Tonight you do not have to stop the thinking. You do not have to calm the mind. You just have to notice from time to time that you are here, in the bed, under the blanket, breathing. That is enough. That is more than enough. There is a story about this. On a coast where the cliffs were dark and the sand was grey, and the sea came in with a sound like the whole world exhaling, there lived an old fisherman. He had been fishing these waters since he was a boy. His skin was dark from years of sun and salt. His hands were thick and scarred from nets and hooks and rope. He moved slowly on land the way fishermen do, as though the ground were less trustworthy than the water. But on his boat he was steady. His feet knew every plank. His body knew every swell. He could read the wind the way other people read faces. He lived in a small house above the beach, where the sand gave way to rough grass, and the grass gave way to stone. The house smelled of salt and dried fish, and the smoke from a stove that had been burning the same kind of wood for 40 years. There was not much inside. A bed, a table, a chair with a cushion that had been mended times. The original fabric was no longer visible. Nets hung from hooks on the wall. A lantern sat on a shelf near the door, its glass darkened with. His grandson came to stay with him the summer the boy turned 12. The boy was thin and quick and full of questions. He had his mother's eyes, dark and bright, and his father's restlessness. He could not sit still for long. His legs bounced when he sat. His fingers drummed on tables. His mind moved the way the sea moved, always ceaselessly, one wave becoming the next before the first had finished. The old man did not try to calm the boy. He simply took him fishing. They went out every evening when the heat of the day had softened and the light turned the color of honey. The old man's boat was small and wooden, painted blue on the outside and bare wood within. It smelled of tar and brine and the particular sweetness of wood that has spent its life in water. The oars were smooth from decades of hands. The boy sat in the bow and watched the coast shrink as they rowed out. On calm evenings, the sea was like glass. The boy could see the bottom, sandy and pale, dotted with dark shapes that might have been rocks or fish or shadows of clouds passing overhead. The water was warm near the surface, and when the boy trailed his hand over the side of the boat, it felt like silk against his fingers. On those nights, fishing was easy. The net went down, the net came up, and the boy felt like he understood the sea. He felt like the sea was something you could learn, the way you learn arithmetic or the names of birds. Something with rules. Something that held still long enough to be known. But on windy evenings, everything changed. The waves came in sets, lifting the bow and dropping it, lifting and dropping, and the boy gripped the sides of the boat and felt his stomach rise and fall with the water. The wind pulled at his clothes and pressed against his chest. The spray hit his face, cold and sharp, tasting of salt and something metallic, like the taste of a coin on the tongue. The nets were harder to handle. The ropes slipped. The boat moved sideways when it should have moved forward. Everything the boy thought he knew about the sea became uncertain, shifting, unreliable. On those nights the boy was afraid, though he would not say so. He held on and watched the old man for signs of worry, for a clenched jaw or a tightened grip or a quick glance at the sky. But the old man's face never changed. He rowed the way he always rowed, steady, even, as though the wind were not there. The sea, calm or wild, was the same sea, and the only thing that changed was the surface. One evening the wind was stronger than usual. It came from the north, cold and steady, pushing the waves into low grey ridges that rolled toward the shore like the backs of sleeping animals. The sky was clear despite the wind, not a single cloud. The stars were sharp and close, as though someone had polished them. The moon was nearly full, hanging low over the water, throwing a wide silver path across the surface that shattered and reformed with every wave. It was beautiful and it was unsettling, the way all powerful things are both at once. The boat rocked harder than usual as they left the shelter of the cove. The boy gripped the edge, his knuckles whitened. The spray came over the cold bursts that left salt on his lips and stung the corners of his eyes. The old man rode through it without comment, adjusting his angle with each swell, reading the water the way the boy read books, fluently, without effort, each sentence leading naturally to the next. They reached the fishing spot and the old man set the net. Then he reached under his seat for the lantern. It was the same lantern that had sat on the shelf near the door of his house, the same darkened glass, the same small brass handle, worn smooth. He lit it with a match, cupping his hands around the flame until it caught. The match smell, sharp, sulfuric, was there and gone in a breath, replaced by the warmer scent of the burning wick. He hung the lantern from a hook on the mast. The wind found the lantern immediately. It pushed against the glass from every side. The flame inside leaned hard to one side, stretching, thinning, its light stuttering against the glass walls. For a moment it was almost flat, almost nothing, a thin orange line that seemed one breath away from disappearing entirely. The boy watched it. His chest tightened. Something in him clenched the way you clench when you are watching something fragile and cannot reach it. "The wind will kill it," the boy said. The old man looked at the lantern, then he looked at the boy. His face was calm, not unconcerned, just calm. The face of someone who has seen this before and knows what comes next. "Maybe," he said. He reached up and adjusted the lantern, turning it so the opening faced away from the wind. The flame steadied. It still moved, still flickered at the edges, but it held. The glass sheltered it, not perfectly, but enough. "Watch," the old man said. The boy watched. The wind blew. It blew hard. It pushed the waves higher and rocked the boat and pulled at the old man's coat and tangled the boy's hair. But the flame inside the lantern went on burning. It was not still. It was not calm. It moved with the wind, leaning and straightening, but it did not go out. "Can you stop the wind?" the old man asked. The boy looked at the sea, the waves, the moonlight breaking apart on the water. The dark line of the coast far away now, just a shadow against the sky. "No," the boy said. "No," the old man agreed. "You cannot stop the wind. Nobody can stop the wind. The wind comes when it comes. It goes when it goes. It does not ask you. It does not check." He pulled the net rope slowly, hand over hand. His movements were unhurried, even in the wind. The rope was wet and rough against his palms. Below them, somewhere in the dark water, the net was filling. "But you can shelter the flame," he said. "You can turn the lantern. You can cup your hand around the match. You can find the angle where the wind passes over instead of through. You do not stop the wind. You just protect what matters." He let the rope rest and looked at the boy. The moonlight was on his face. The lines around his eyes were deep. They looked like the lines the water makes in the sand when the tide goes out. "Your mind," he said. "It is like the wind tonight. Loud, moving, going everywhere at once. You cannot stop it. If I told you to stop thinking, it would be like telling the wind to stop blowing. Foolish. A waste of good breath." He tapped the side of the lantern gently with his finger. The glass rang softly, a small, clear sound that the wind carried away immediately. "But here," he said, "here is your flame, your breath, this moment, this boat, this water under us. The flame does not need the wind to stop. It just needs a little shelter, a little attention. Not all the time, just now and then, just enough to keep it from going out. The boy was quiet. The boat rocked. The net rope creaked against the wooden edge. Somewhere far out, another boat's lantern made a small point of orange light against the dark water, rising and falling with the swells. 2 flames in the wind, both still burning. The old man began to pull the net again. The boy helped. The rope was cold and wet in his hands. His fingers ached, but the work was steady and the rhythm was simple. And after a while the boy noticed that his mind had gone quiet, not silent. The wind was still there, the thoughts were still there, but they were farther away now, like sounds from another room. And in the foreground, close and clear, there was only this: the rope, the pull, the weight of the net, the cold air on his face, the lantern swinging gently on its hook, its flame leaning but not falling, burning but not fighting, alive in the wind without trying to defeat it. They pulled the net into the boat. It was heavier than the boy expected. The weight of the catch pressed the rope into his palms, leaving red marks that stung in the salt air. Silver fish caught the moonlight and flashed once, twice, then lay still in the bottom of the boat, their mouths opening and closing slowly. The boy's hands smelled of salt and scales, and the deep cold scent of the water itself. It was not an unpleasant smell. It was the smell of the world below the surface, the world that went on whether the wind blew or not. The old man began sorting the catch, his fingers quick and sure even in the dark. He knew each fish by touch, by weight, by the way it moved in his hand. He set them into baskets without looking, his hands working from a knowledge that was older than thought. The boy watched him. There was something in the old man's hands that he wanted to understand, a kind of peace that had nothing to do with the absence of difficulty. The wind was still blowing, the waves were still pushing, the boat was still rocking, and the old man's hands were still steady, not because the world was calm, but because his hands had stopped arguing with the world. The boy sat in the bow and watched the moon. It was higher now. The silver path on the water had narrowed to a thin, bright line. The wind was still blowing, but it had shifted. It came from the side now, and the boat rocked differently, a slow, deep roll that felt less like danger and more like breathing, like the sea itself was breathing. And they were sitting on its chest, rising and falling, rising and falling. The waves made a soft sound against the hull, a low rhythmic thud, like a heartbeat heard through a wall. He looked at the lantern. The flame was steady now, not still, not calm, not by fighting, not by trying, just by being sheltered, just by being given enough protection to do what flames do, burn without going out. The boy did not say anything about this to the old man. He did not need to. Something had settled in him that was not a thought and not a feeling, but something in between, like a rope that had been pulled tight all summer and had finally found some slack. Not loose, not collapsed, just not straining anymore. He did not understand it. He did not try to. He just sat in the bow of the boat on the dark water under the moon and let the wind blow and let the flame burn and let the sea do whatever the sea was going to do. They rowed back in silence. The oars dipped and pulled, dipped and pulled. The sound was rhythmic, hypnotic. The creak of the oarlocks, the splash of the blades, the drip of water falling back into the sea. The boy's eyes grew heavy. His head nodded once, twice, and then he was leaning sideways, his cheek against the damp wood of the bow, the spray misting his face. The old man's rowing a steady pulse beneath him like the heartbeat of the boat itself. The lantern still burned above him, its flame small and gold against the dark sky. And the old man rowed on home through the wind, his grandson sleeping in the bow, the fish silver in the baskets, the moon watching from above like someone who had seen this many times before and never tired of it. You do not have to calm the sea tonight. The sea is vast and old, and it does not take instructions. The waves will come, the wind will blow. The mind will think its thoughts in the dark the way it has always done. You only have to let the anchor touch the bottom. Not the bottom of the sea, the bottom of you. The deep, still place that the waves do not reach. It is there. It has always been there, under the noise, under every thought that feels like a wave about to pull you under. There is a place in you that the surface cannot touch, and the anchor is just your attention, falling gently, sinking through the noise, coming to rest in the quiet below. You do not have to hold on to it. You do not have to grip, you just have to let it drop. Let the weight of it carry it down like gravity does. And when it reaches the bottom, the boat will still rock. The waves will still come. The wind will still blow. But you will not drift. You will be held, not by effort, by depth. The flame is still burning. It does not need the wind to stop. It just needs you, here, noticing, breathing, letting the shelter of this breath, this moment, this quiet, dark room be enough. Rest here for a while. Feel the body. Feel how it is being rocked gently by the breath, in and out, like a boat on a quiet sea. The wind is still there. That is all right. The flame is still here too. And it is enough. It has always been enough. When you are ready, we will go on together. There is only a little more now, and it is very gentle. You are still here. Or perhaps you are half here and half somewhere else. That is fine. That is more than fine. The place between waking and sleeping is a gentle place. You do not have to choose one or the other. You can stay here, in the in-between, for as long as you like. There is one more thing worth knowing tonight. It is a small thing. You may already know it somewhere in your body, even if your mind has not caught up yet, and it is this. Rest is not the opposite of growth. It is not wasted time. It is not the space between the things that matter. Rest is where the growing happens. The quiet kind. The kind that no one sees. The kind that takes place in the dark underground, in the parts of you that do not have a name. Think of roots. They do not grow in the light. They grow in the dark, in the soil, in the silence beneath the surface, where no one watches and no one applauds, and yet without them nothing above the ground could stand. Tonight you are not doing nothing. You are growing roots. There is a story about this. In a monastery that sat on the side of a hill, surrounded by trees so old their branches touched the ground in places, there was a garden. It was not a grand garden. It was the kind of garden that exists because someone loved it, because one person over many years had knelt in the dirt and planted things and watered them and waited. The woman who kept the garden was old. She had come to the monastery as a young woman, carrying nothing but a small bag and a sadness she did not talk about. The monks had let her stay off. She did not meditate in the hall or chant in the mornings. She simply worked in the garden. That was her practice. That was her prayer. Prayer. Her hands in the soil, her knees on the earth, the slow, patient work of helping things grow. Over the years, the garden had become something remarkable, not because it was large or elaborate, but because it was alive in a way that other gardens were not. The flowers bloomed longer here. The vegetables grew taller. The herbs were more fragrant, their scent rising from the beds in the evening, like a kind of music you could smell instead of hear. Monks from other monasteries would sometimes visit just to walk the paths between the beds and stand among the plants, and wonder how one old woman could grow things this way. She never explained. When asked, she would smile and say something about the soil, or the water, or the light, but she never gave a full answer because the truth was, she did not fully understand it herself. She only knew that she loved the work, that the work was enough, that the growing was not something she did but something she allowed. The garden had two sides. The front side faced south. It received the most sunlight. This was where the visible garden lived. The rows of vegetables, neat and green, the flowers that opened in the morning and closed at dusk, the herbs that the monks used in their cooking and their teas. This was the garden that visitors saw, the garden that received praise, the garden that people pointed to and said, "Look what she has done." The backside faced north. It was shaded by the monastery wall and by a row of old trees whose canopy was so thick that even at midday the light barely reached the ground. This side of the garden was darker, cooler, quieter. The soil here was different, richer, blacker. It smelt of something deep and ancient, like the inside of the earth itself. Few people came to this side. There was nothing to see. No flowers, no bright colors, no rows of anything recognizable. But the old woman spent more time here than anywhere else. She would come in the early mornings, before the sun reached even the front garden, when the air was still cool and the dew sat on every surface like a second skin of water. The monastery was quiet at that hour. The monks were in the meditation hall. The kitchen had not yet started. The only sounds were the birds waking in the trees above. A slow, scattered conversation, one voice answering another across the canopy. and the soft pad of the old woman's bare feet on the garden path. She would kneel on the dark soil and work, not planting exactly, not weeding, something more like tending, something that did not have a name in any language she knew. She would press her hands into the earth and feel what was happening below. She could feel which parts of the soil were warm and which were cool. She could feel where the moisture had gathered and where it had drained away in the night. She would move mulch from one place to another. She would pour water slowly from a clay jug in thin streams, watching it disappear into the soil the way a word disappears into a silence that was waiting for it. Sometimes she would simply sit, for a long time, doing nothing visible, just sitting on the dark earth with her hands in her lap, looking at nothing, listening to the soil the way a mother listens to a sleeping child. Not for any particular sound, just listening, to be sure, to be present, to say with her body, "I am here, I am paying attention, even though nothing is happening that anyone can see." The young monks did not understand. One of them, a boy not much older than 17, watched her one morning from the path. He had been at the monastery for a year. He was earnest and eager, and he wanted to understand everything, the way young people do before they learn that some things are understood best by not understanding them. He walked to where she was kneeling. "Why do you spend so much time here?" he asked. "Nothing grows on this side." The old woman looked up at him. Her hands were dark with soil. Her face was lined and calm. She did not seem offended by the question. She seemed amused by it the way you are amused by a child who asks why the sky is up. "Come here," she said, "kneel down." The boy knelt beside her on the cool earth. The soil was damp under his knees. He could feel it soaking through the fabric of his robe. The air smelled of earth and leaf mold and the faint green scent of moss. Above them the trees shifted and a thin column of light fell through the canopy and landed on the ground near his hand, pale and brief, like a visitor who had come to the wrong door. "Put your hand here," the old woman said. She guided his hand to a spot on the ground that looked like nothing, just dark earth, flat, unremarkable. He pressed his palm against the soil. "Do you feel that?" she asked. He did not know what he was supposed to feel. The soil was cool, damp, soft in places and firm in others. He waited. He breathed. He let his hand rest there the way she seemed to let everything rest, without expectation, without demand. And then he felt it, or thought he felt it, something beneath his palm. Not a movement exactly, more like a pressure, a very faint, very slow pushing from below, as though something under the surface was reaching upward with a patience that made human patience look like haste. "What is that?" he whispered. "Roots," the old woman said. "This is where the roots are. Everything you see on the other side of the garden, the flowers, the vegetables, the herbs, they are alive because of what is happening here, in the dark, in the soil, where no one watches." She sat back on her heels and looked at the shaded garden. The trees above them moved again, and the light shifted, and the shadows rearranged themselves on the ground like guests finding their seats at a table. "People always want to see the flowers," she said. "They want the bright thing, the visible thing, the thing they can point to. But the flowers are the last thing that happens. They are the very end of a long, slow process that began here, in the dark, months ago, years ago. The roots came first. The roots always come first. And the roots grow best when no one is looking." She reached down and moved a small pile of mulch to one side, revealing the base of a plant. Its stem was thin and pale, disappearing into the earth. But where it entered the soil, the boy could see just barely the beginning of something. A network of fine white threads spreading outward into the dark, delicate, intricate, vast. Like a map of rivers seen from very high up, like the veins in a leaf held up to light. "This plant," the old woman said, "has been growing for 3 years. For 2 of those years, nothing appeared above the surface. Nothing at all. If you had walked by, you would have seen bare earth. You might have thought nothing was happening. You might have thought the seed had failed." She covered the roots again gently, the way you cover a sleeping child. "But something was happening," she said. "The most important thing was happening. The roots were finding their way, reaching deeper, spreading wider, learning the soil, learning where the water was, learning how to hold on when the storms came. And when the plant was ready, Not when I decided, not when I wanted it to, but when the roots were deep enough and wide enough and strong enough, it came up. And it was the strongest plant in the garden. She stood slowly, her knees cracked. She brushed the soil from her hands and looked at the boy with an expression that was neither a smile nor a lesson, just a kind of knowing. The way someone looks at you when they are telling you something they learned the hard way and wish they could have learned sooner. Rest is like this, she said. Everyone thinks rest is the absence of growth, the pause between the real thing, the empty space where nothing happens. But rest is the dark side of the garden. Rest is where the roots go. Rest is the work that no one sees and no one praises and no one puts in a frame on the wall. But without it, nothing stands, nothing blooms, nothing lasts. She walked back toward the front garden. Her steps were slow and measured, the way she did everything, as though each movement were a kind of conversation with the ground beneath her. The boy stayed for a long time. He kept his hand on the soil. He could still feel it. That slow, patient pressure from below, the reaching, the becoming, the growing that did not need light or attention or applause. Just time, just dark, just the quiet faith of a seed that did not need to see the sun in order to know it was there. Around him the shaded garden went on being what it was. A bird landed on a low branch and turned its head, watching him with one bright eye. A spider's web stretched between two stalks near the wall, each thread dotted with dew that caught what little light there was and held it in tiny trembling points. The smell of the earth was everywhere, that deep, dark, living smell. Not the smell of decay, the smell of becoming, of the slow, patient alchemy that turns dead leaves and rain and time into something that can hold a flower up to the sky. He did not know it then, but he would remember this morning for the rest of his life. Not as a lesson, not as a teaching, as a feeling. The feeling of the cool soil under his palm and the slow push of something alive beneath it, and the old woman's voice saying rest is where the roots go, and knowing in a place deeper than thought that she was right. Rest is not the opposite of growth. It is where the roots go when no one is looking. Tonight, you are in the dark side of the garden, the quiet side, the side that no one sees and no one talks about. And something is happening here. You may not feel it, you may not be able to name it, but something in you is reaching deeper, finding water, finding ground, learning how to hold. You have been in the light all day. You have been visible. You have been doing and answering and showing up and performing the 1,000 small acts that make up a life. And now the light has gone and the doing is done. And you are here in the dark and the mind says you should still be doing something. That rest is a waste. That sleep is a gap in the record. That the only things that count are the things that can be seen. But the old woman knew something different. The roots knew something different. The deepest growth happens in the dark, in the quiet, in the unseen hours when the world is not watching and you are not trying, and the only thing happening is the slow, steady work of the soil and the seed and the water, finding its way down. You do not have to see the flower tonight. The flower will come. It always comes. But tonight is for the roots. Tonight is for the slow, invisible work of becoming. The kind of becoming that does not announce itself. The kind that happens in the dark, in the silence, in the space between one breath and the next. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to be here in the dark, growing in ways that no one can see. Not even you, especially not you. The roots do not watch themselves grow. They just grow. And tonight, that is enough. Let us be still here for a long while. There is no hurry. There is almost nothing left now. Feel the weight of the body against the bed. Feel how heavy the arms have become, how heavy the legs. This is not the heaviness of burden. This is the heaviness of settling, the heaviness of soil, the heaviness of the earth itself, holding you the way it holds every seed, every root, every growing thing. You do not have to hold yourself. The ground is here. It has always been here. When you are ready, we will go on together. There is only a little more, and it is very quiet. If you are still awake, that is all right. If you are not, that is all right too. These words will be here either way. They do not mind whether you hear them. They are just here, the way the dark is here, the way the breath is here, the way the blanket is here, not asking for anything, not needing anything, just resting beside you. There is one last thing. It is the gentlest thing of all. You may be waiting for sleep, lying here in the quiet, wondering when it will come, listening for it, watching for it, the way you watch for a train that is late, checking. Is it here yet? What about now? What about now? But sleep is not a train. Sleep does not arrive from somewhere else. It does not come down a track from a distant station. It is already here. It has been here the whole time, under the thinking, under the waiting, under the watching. Sleep is not something that comes to you. It is what is already here when you stop waiting for it. There is a story about this, a very quiet one. It is almost not a story at all. It is more like a sound that becomes a silence that becomes a sound again. In a valley where the mist came every evening like a slow white tide, filling the spaces between the trees and softening every edge until the world looked like a painting that someone had breathed on, there was a monastery. It was small. 12 monks lived there, and a few novices who were still learning the shape of the days. The buildings were old, made of wood that had darkened over the decades until it was nearly black. The roofs curved gently upward at the corners, as though they were trying very slowly to lift off the ground. The monastery was known for one thing, its bell. The bell hung in a wooden tower at the center of the courtyard. It was not a large bell, but its sound carried. When it was struck, the tone moved outward from the tower like water spreading from a dropped stone, rolling across the courtyard, over the walls, down the hillside, through the mist and into the valley below. People in the village at the bottom of the hill could hear it. They said it sounded different from other bells. Softer, longer, as though the sound did not want to end, but simply stretched itself thinner and thinner until it became part of the air. The bell was struck 3 times each evening. Once at sunset, once when the sky had gone fully dark. Once more much later, when the monks were already on their cushions in the meditation hall, and the world outside had gone so still that the bell's sound seemed to fill not just the courtyard but the entire sky, the space between the stars. There was a novice at the monastery. He was young, perhaps 14, and he had been there for less than a year. He was small for his age. His robe was always slightly too large, the sleeves falling past his wrists, the hem brushing the floor when he walked. He had a serious face and quiet eyes, and a way of standing very still when he was thinking, as though his body were listening to something his ears could not hear. He was having trouble with meditation. Not the kind of trouble that involves restlessness or boredom or the legs going numb, although he had all of those too. His trouble was different. He could not find the silence. Every evening when the bell rang for the 3rd time and the monks settled onto their cushions, the novice would close his eyes and try to find the still place inside himself. The place the older monks talked about, the place where the thinking stops and the breathing slows, and there is nothing but awareness, clear and open, like a sky without clouds. He could not find it. He listened for it. He searched for it. He sat perfectly still and held his breath and squeezed his attention into a tight beam, pointing it inward like a lantern into a dark room, looking for the silence, scanning every corner, checking behind every thought. But the silence was never there, or if it was, it moved before he could reach it, like a shadow that shifts when you turn your head, like a word on the tip of your tongue that dissolves the moment you try to say it. He began to dread the evening bell, not because of the sound. The sound was beautiful. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard, and each time it rang, something in his chest ached in a way he could not explain. The way you ache when you see something you love but cannot touch. But because the sound meant it was time to sit, and sitting meant failing, and failing meant another night of lying on his mat afterward, staring at the ceiling of the dormitory, listening to the other monks breathing easily, sleeping easily, resting in the silence he could not find. He would lie there and the mind would circle. What am I doing wrong? Why can everyone else find it? Am I not trying hard enough? Am I trying too hard? Is there something broken in me that cannot be fixed? The questions went around and around, like water in a bowl that someone will not stop stirring. One evening after the 3rd bell, the novice did not go to the meditation hall. He went instead to the courtyard. The mist had come in early. It lay over everything like a blanket. The bell tower was a dark shape in the grey, its outline soft, its edges blurred. The bell itself was invisible. Hear it. The last ring was fading. That long, slow, thinning sound. Stretching. stretching, getting quieter and quieter until it was not a sound anymore but a memory of a sound. And then not even that. He stood in the mist and listened to the silence that came after the bell. It was not empty. That was the thing he had never noticed before. The silence after the bell was not an absence. It was full. Full of the bell's sound, full of the echo, full of the space that the sound had left behind, like the shape of a hand in clay after the hand has been removed. A voice came from behind him. "You are not in the hall." It was one of the senior monks, not the abbot, one of the quieter ones. A man who had been at the monastery for many years and who rarely spoke, but when he did, his voice had a quality like the bell itself. Low, clear, unhurried, as though each word had been given exactly the amount of breath it needed and no more. The novice did not turn around. "I cannot find the silence," he said. "I sit and I look for it and it is not there." The senior monk walked to where the novice was standing. His footsteps on the stone courtyard were soft. The mist moved around him as he walked, parting and closing again behind him. He stood beside the novice and looked up at the bell tower. "When does the silence begin?" the senior monk asked. The novice thought about this. "After the bell stops ringing," he said. "Are you sure?" The novice was quiet. He did not understand the question. The senior monk reached into the pocket of his robe and took out a small wooden mallet. Not the large mallet that was used to strike the main bell, a small one, the kind used for the small handbells in the meditation hall. "Listen," he said. He struck the side of the bell tower's wooden post. A soft, clear note, not just enough to be heard. The sound moved through the mist and disappeared. "Where is the silence?" the senior monk asked. "After the sound," the novice said, "when the sound is gone." "Listen again," the senior monk said. He struck the post once more, the same clear note. It rang, it faded, it thinned to nothing. "Now," the senior monk said, "was there a moment when the sound ended and the silence began? Can you point to it? Can you say, here, at this exact instant, the sound stopped and the silence started?" The novice listened to the fading tone. He tried to find the line between the sound and the silence. The edge, the border, the moment of crossing. But there was no line. The sound became quieter and quieter, and at some point it was gone. But he could not say when. It was like watching the sky change from day to night. At some point the light was gone, but there was no moment when it left. It just softened and softened until it was something else. "I cannot find it," the novice said. "No," the senior monk said. "Because it is not there, the silence does not begin when the sound ends. The silence is already here. It was here before the bell was struck. It is here after the bell is gone. The sound does not interrupt the silence. The sound happens inside the silence. The way a fish moves through water, the water does not break. The water holds the fish and the fish moves through, and the water is still water." He struck the post a third time. The note rang out thin and clear into the mist. "Listen," he said, "not to the sound, to what the sound is happening inside of." The novice listened. The note faded, and this time, as it thinned, he did not chase it. He did not try to follow the sound to its end. He did not search for the border between ringing and not ringing. He just stood in the mist in the courtyard in the evening and let the sound do what it was going to do. And as it faded, he noticed that the silence was not arriving. It was not coming from somewhere. It had been here the whole time. He was standing in it. He had always been standing in it. The bell had rung inside the silence, and now the bell was quiet and the silence was still here, unchanged, unbroken, the same silence that had been here before the monastery was built, before the valley was named, before any of it. He felt something shift in his chest, not a thought, not a revelation, something more like a knot being loosened by very patient hands. The knot had been there for months, tight and small and constant, sitting just behind his ribs, the knot of trying. The knot of searching, the knot of believing that the silence was somewhere else, and he was failing to find it. And now the knot was loosening, not because he had found the answer, but because the question had dissolved. There was nothing to find. There had never been anything to find. The silence was not hidden. It was not on the other side of some effort. It was here. Under his feet, in the mist, in the space between his heartbeats, in the pause between one breath and the next. The senior monk had already walked away. His footsteps faded on the wet stone. The mist closed behind him and he was gone. The novice stood alone in the courtyard. The bell tower rose above him, dark and still. The bell hung inside it, silent, waiting to be struck again in the morning. But even in its silence, the bell was not empty. It held the memory of every tone it had ever made. And the silence held the bell, and the courtyard held the silence, and the valley held the courtyard, and the night held everything. The novice went to his mat that night and lay down. The dormitory was dark. The other monks were already still, their breathing a low, soft chorus, each breath slightly different in rhythm and depth, like rain falling on different surfaces. Through the window, the mist pressed against the glass, pale and glowing faintly, as though the moonlight had dissolved into the water in the air and was suspended there, neither rising nor falling. He pulled the blanket to his chin. It was rough and smelled of cedar, the same smell that lived in every room of the monastery, as though the wood itself were still breathing. He lay on his back. He did not try to find the silence. He did not try to stop the thinking. He did not try to sleep. He just lay there in the dark, with the sound of breathing around him and the mist pressing softly against the windows, and the last trace of the bell still somewhere in the air. Or maybe just in his memory. He could not tell the difference anymore. It did not matter. The sound and the silence were not two things. They were one thing. The way the water and the fish were one thing. The way the night and the dark were one thing. And sleep did not come to him. Because sleep had never been something that came. It was what was already here. Under the waiting, under the trying, under the long exhausting search for something that had been right beneath him the whole time. The way the ground is beneath you when you stop looking down and just stand. Sleep is not something that arrives. It is what is already here when you stop waiting for it. You have been waiting perhaps, counting the minutes, measuring the hours, listening for sleep the way the novice listened for silence, with effort, with attention, with the tight focus of someone who believes the thing they are looking for is somewhere else. But it is not somewhere else. It is here. It has been here since you lay down, since before you lay down. It is the space beneath the thoughts, the quiet under the noise, the ground under the searching. You do not have to find it. You just have to stop reaching and let what is already here hold you. The bell has already been struck. The sound is fading, and the silence that remains is not empty. It is full, full of everything you need tonight, full of rest, full of the dark, full of the slow, patient weight of the body letting go. You are allowed to stop looking. You are allowed to stop trying. You are allowed to be here exactly now, and let that be enough. Let us be still here, very still, for a long time. There is nothing more to do, nothing more to find, nothing more to fix or solve or understand. The bell has rung, the sound is fading, and the silence is already yours. It was always yours. Feel the body. Feel how still it has become. Feel the breath, slow and deep, moving on its own. The way tides move on their own. The way seasons move on their own. The way everything that is real moves without being told. You do not need to carry any of it. You do not need to hold on. Just rest. Just be here. Just let the silence hold you the way it has been holding everything since the very beginning. When you are ready, we will finish together. There is only one more thing, and it is almost nothing at all. The stream is still running. Somewhere on a hill in the dark, water is moving over smooth stones, and the stones are not fighting it, and the water is not trying to stop, and both of them are at peace with what they are. The old man is sitting on his rock, or perhaps he is sleeping. It does not matter. The stream runs, whether he watches or not. The cloth is still on the loom. The dark threads have been set aside, resting on the table beside a lamp that has long since burned out. The fabric is whole. The pattern continues even now, even in the dark, even when no one is watching it. The grandmother's hands are still. The shuttle is quiet. The cloth does not need her tonight. It is already what it is. Somewhere a lake is clearing. The mud is settling, grain by grain, finding the bottom the way everything finds the bottom when it is no longer stirred. No one is sitting beside it. No one needs to. The bamboo creaks softly. The water holds the sky, and the old nun's flat stone is cool and empty in the dark. A lantern is still burning on a boat somewhere far out on the water, where the waves rise and fall like breathing. The wind is still blowing, and the flame is still here, leaning, but here, a small gold point against all that dark, and somewhere in the bow someone is sleeping, rocked by the sea, held by the deep. The roots are still growing. In the dark side of a garden that no one visits at this hour, in soil that smells of rain and time, something is reaching deeper. Something is becoming, without light, without praise, without anyone watching at all. The old woman's hands are resting, but the garden goes on. It does not need her permission to grow. And the bell has been struck. The sound is almost gone now. Almost. Just a trace of it left in the air, so thin it might be silent, so quiet it might be nothing. And the silence that remains is not empty. It is full. Full of everything that came before. Full of everything that does not need to be carried anymore. You do not have to remember any of this. Not the stories, not the names, not the teachings or the ideas or the words. You do not have to hold on to any of it the way you hold on to things during the day, gripping tight, afraid of losing them. Tonight, the hands can open. Tonight, everything you heard can drift away like smoke from a fire that has burned down to its last warm coals. If something stays, it will stay on its own. If something leaves, it was ready to leave. You do not have to decide. You do not have to sort. You do not have to carry any of it. The only thing left is this. You are not the thinking tonight. You are not the worry. You are not the planning, or the replaying, or the counting of hours. You are not the mind that would not stop. You are not the second arrow. You are not the dark threads. You are not the mud in the water. You are not the wind. You are the quiet that the thinking happens inside of. You are the room with all the candles. You are the house where the guests come and go. You are the lake that clears on its own. You are the ground that holds the roots. You are the silence that was here before the bell, and will be here long after the bell is forgotten. And the quiet does not need to try. It does not need to effort. It does not need to earn itself or prove itself or wait for permission. It is already here. It has always been here. It was here before tonight. It will be here tomorrow. And right now, in this breath, in this dark, in this bed, it is holding you the way it holds everything, without grasping, without conditions, without end. You are vast and you are still and you are here. Let everything else go now. The stories, the words, the ideas. Let them go the way leaves go when they fall from a tree. Not with grief, not with effort, just releasing, just the small, natural letting go that happens when something is finished and knows it is finished. Feel the body one last time. Feel how heavy it has become. The arms, resting wherever they fell. The legs sinking into the mattress. The hands open on the blanket or beside you, holding nothing, needing to hold nothing. Feel the weight of the head on the pillow, how it presses down, how the pillow presses back. A conversation between the body and the bed that needs no words. Feel the weight of the eyelids. They may already be closed. If they are not, let them close now. Not with effort. Just the way a door closes when the wind drops. Just the way a flower closes when the light goes. This is not a heaviness you need to lift. This is the heaviness that comes when the body has finally said yes. Yes to the dark, yes to the quiet, yes to the rest that was always waiting here, patient and kind, asking nothing in return. The breath is slow now. You may not even notice it anymore. That is good. That is the breath doing what it does when no one is watching. When no one is counting. When the mind has finally gently set down its work for the night, you do not have to breathe it. Let the body do what it already knows how to do. It has been doing this since before you could speak, since before you could think, since the very first moment of you. It knows the way. There is nothing to solve tonight. There is nothing to fix. There is nothing to understand. There is nothing to become. There is only this, the dark, the breath, the body at rest. And you here, in the middle of all of it, held by something larger than the night, something older than the stories, something that does not have a name because it does not need one. You are safe here. You are allowed here. You have always been allowed here. The night is large and quiet, and it is holding everything. The houses, the trees, the sleeping birds, the rivers, the hills, the monasteries, and the boats and the gardens. And you, it is holding you too, the way it holds everything. Without asking why, without asking how long, just holding. The way the dark has always held the ones who needed it most. The stream is running, the cloth is whole, the water is clear, the flame is burning, the roots are growing, The bell is silent, and you are here, and that is enough. That has always been enough. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Moonlit Dharma.